Heather Slane is an architectural historian who came to us after our first consultant had gotten a full-time job and stopped working with us. So she filled it, she picked up the whole project, smoothed it out, made it look pretty. So thank you very much, Heather. She is experienced in working with developers, architects, contractors, and homeowners to obtain rehabilitation tax credits for projects in documented historic districts and homes. So, great job.
Hello, hello everyone. It's nice to be back in Winton. It feels like a lifetime ago that I was here. I think it was 2018. So that was a pandemic and a child ago. So I barely remember. So don't ask me any questions too specific to the buildings. If you want to skip to the next slide. Your district is so big.
It's not good.
Oh, use the over arrow. There you go.
Can you do it?
Maybe just let it go. We'll start. That I had to split your map into two pieces, but it's all together on the map over on the side. So I'm going to give you a quick overview. The Winton Historic District includes the majority of the historic resources in the town of Winton. Established in 1766 as the county seat of Hertford County, the town is located on the south bank of the Choyan River, centered in the northern boundary of the county. It stands approximately 8 miles northeast of Ahoskie, the county's largest city, and about 10 miles southeast of Murfreesboro. The town was burned by Union troops during the Civil War, and the remaining above-ground resources largely date from the late 1860s through the late 1960s. The district is largely residential, though includes a number of commercial resources in the 100 and the 400 to 500 blocks of North Main Street. Governmental resources in the 700 to 800 blocks of North King, and institutional resources centered on the C.S. Brown School. The district also includes churches and cemeteries located throughout the district. In total, there are 103 primary resources, including 99 buildings and 4 sites, as well as secondary resources. And secondary resources tend to be garages, sheds, or other things that are tied to a larger resource on the property. And all of those were constructed between circa 1863, which is the oldest existing resource, and 1970. And they contribute to the significance of the district. So as Julie mentioned, some things are contributing and some are not. So you have 103 primary resources that are contributing and only 27 resources, including 28 outbuildings or secondary resources, that are not contributing because they were either not present during the period of significance, so they were built after 1970, or they have been so altered that they have lost sufficient historic integrity. So that's a really high percentage for some of these historic districts. So 79% of the total resources contribute to this historic and architectural significance of the district. And the period of significance, which is the range, the date range in which things need to fall, begins with 1868, when the first buildings were constructed following the burning of Winton during the Civil War, and extends to 1970, when the C.S. Brown School was integrated and the growth of the town had slowed substantially. So, as Julie mentioned, there are different criteria for significance, and the Winton Historic District was listed under multiple criteria, so I'm going to go through those quickly. The district is locally significant under criterion A for commerce. Winton served as an important commercial hub for farmers in Hertford County and the surrounding counties who brought cotton, peanuts, and corn to market in town. The early 20th century commercial buildings located on Main Street provided a variety of services to both farmers in the region and local residents, including a post office, banks, law offices, pharmacies, restaurants, department stores, and grocery stores. Located on the Choyan River, the river supported the growth of the herring fishing and pulpwood industries in Winton throughout the 20th century, which in turn supported the businesses within the historic district. The district is also significant under criterion A for politics and government, as the county seat of Hertford County since 1766. The 1956 Hertford County Courthouse is the county's 4th courthouse, the first established along with the county itself. And although it's unclear whether an existing building was used for that earliest courthouse or a new building was constructed, either way it was destroyed by arsonists in 1830. A second courthouse was burned in 1862 by Union troops, and an 1870 courthouse was demolished for the construction of the current building. Together with the courthouse, the 1950-51 Hertford County Office Building and the Hertford County Department of Health remain the center of government for the county and one of Winton's primary employers. It is also significant under criterion A for Native American ethnic heritage and African American ethnic heritage and education. The southern portion of the district includes a historically significant school for students of color, including African American, Native American, and multiracial children. The C.S. Brown School opened in 1886 as Chowan Academy, a boarding school for students of color and the only high school for students of color in Hertford County until 1937. Adjacent to the school is the historically African American First Baptist Church of Winton, founded in 1895, and Manley Field, the former Chowan Bees baseball stadium, which provided popular recreational opportunities for African Americans from the late 1930s into the early 1950s. These institutions formed the foundation of the African American residential community that developed in this area of Winton, near the southern end of the district. And then, as we mentioned, there are two properties within the district that were already listed on the National Register. And so the significance of those individual buildings is also the significance of the district. So the C.S. Brown School Auditorium, which was listed in 1985, is significant under criterion A for education and under criterion B for its association with Calvin Scott Brown, one of North Carolina's best known African American educators and religious leaders. It was also listed under criterion C for its local significance as a colonial revival style building that embodies the characteristics of educational buildings constructed throughout the early 20th century. The district also includes Gray Gables, listed in 1982. It's significant at the local level under criterion C as the best example of Queen Anne architecture surviving in Winton and one of a few high-style buildings of this era in the county. And then the document goes through all of the different architectural styles that are present in the historic district, and it also gives a much more thorough history and sort of justification for those areas of significance. We're just going to click through to give you a few examples of the different styles of buildings, so you can click as I'm reading. So the district as a whole is significant under criterion C for architecture. It contains residential, commercial, governmental, and institutional buildings in styles and forms that illustrate national trends. Late 19th century buildings include examples of the Italianate, Queen Anne, and Gothic Revival styles. Early 20th century styles include the Colonial Revival, Neoclassical, Craftsman, and Period Cottage styles. And most mid-20th century buildings were constructed in the minimal traditional, modernist, and ranch styles. There are also a significant representation of early 20th century commercial buildings and vernacular residential buildings within the district. And that is a very, very quick summary of the report that we prepared. And I don't have a copy of it with me, but it is available on the State Historic Preservation website where you can download a PDF of the full report. So I think next we're going to talk about tax credits. We have our tax credit restoration specialist was unable to join us today. So we're going to run through his presentation and answer questions about the tax credit program. So this is just a snapshot of some buildings in Winton. I think he tried to populate it mostly with buildings from your town, including the Calvin Scott Brown, which may have been rehabbed early on in the 70s or 80s?
80s.
In the 80s. So this is, as Julie was talking about, a representation of all of the National Register listed districts and properties across the state. So you all have a great map that shows you the Winton Historic District, but you can also go to the state's GIS site and you can zoom into any part of the state and see where the historic districts and historic properties are.
And it also links to other developments.
And there are also, yes, it links to, if you go through the GIS site, you can also download the nomination from that site as well. So old buildings have intrinsic value in materials, craftsmanship, and beauty. And I know you all know that, living in the historic buildings, they don't build them like they used to. So, and we talk a lot in preservation about embodied energy. And when you destroy a building, you're not only destroying the materials, but all of the energy that it took to create that building in the first place. And they contain our memories, and that's a lot of what these historic districts are, is in some ways the nostalgia for the way that things were, but also just the memories of the people that grew up there. So my background is in architecture, and that's sort of my specialty, is describing buildings, but the buildings themselves are not important if you don't know the stories of the people that lived in them. That's what really makes historic districts and historic properties come to life. So this is one example of Rosenwald schools that are throughout North Carolina. And that the State Historic Preservation Office is really there. They have a whole restoration branch that is there specifically to aid in the tax credits, but also to answer technical questions about how to preserve historic buildings. So they have people that have been working with these buildings, restoration architects and professionals that are very in tune with the changing methods of technology and the ways to address different types of issues that may happen in historic buildings, from broken windows to lack of insulation to crumbling brick. So they're there to help and to answer those questions. And I think those are showing pictures of the way that they rehab the school. I'm honestly not sure what that is, because it seems like a new building.
You see that working together maybe?
So we're just gonna flip through some of these.
Maybe
The Mitchells said, investing in Elizabeth City's downtown is something they long wanted to do. I've worked downtown for over 30 years, and we both love Elizabeth City and downtown in particular. We're just excited about an opportunity to be part of the downtown revitalization. So this is pictures, the before and after of the wig shop in Elizabeth City. And these are challenges. I assume some of the challenges are going to be structural things and not being able to get some of the materials. There are also opportunities. There are revolving funds. I know that Preservation North Carolina for a while had an option on the house down the street trying to sell it. So there are certainly opportunities for buying and preserving these historic buildings. And these may be the same buildings from the previous slide. Yep. The Ahoskie High School, these were remodeled into senior housing in the 80s or 90s. It was a while ago. I did a historic district in Ahoskie, I think in 2010, and it was done before that. And this is what it looked like before they turned it into housing. So even with collapsed roofs, usually, especially with brick structures, the walls are sound enough that you can rebuild the roof. And the floor. So these are some summaries of the economic benefits of the tax credits. The income producing tax credits, and those are, I assume he's going to get to this later in the slides, those are the federal tax credits that are for commercial buildings. They can also be for rental properties, any property that is generating income. And those are based on a federal program that began in 1976. And the state has had a piggyback program on top of that federal program. The non-income producing program, which is generally for homeowner occupied houses, began in 1998. It disappeared in 2015. The state legislature didn't renew it, and then a year later, they reintroduced a new program. So it is, do you have it?
No, you keep going,
Sure.
I had something else to add.
Okay.
A question to ask.
So there is currently a non-income producing state credit, but there was a gap at one point in 2015 or 2016. And so this is a summary of the number of projects completed and the estimated rehabilitation expenditures that qualified for the credit.
Heather, my comment was to let people know that since we are in a tier 1 county, people who own income producing properties can also benefit from another 5% tax credit. So there's 20% federal, 15% state, 5% tier 1.
And I assume he's gonna get to those
Oh,
numbers.
sorry.
Well, I don't know what's in this presentation.
We'll hear it twice.
Yes. This is the economic impacts by town per capita. So this is the number of projects per person by town. So Edenton has been doing the most work, and you can sort of see them go all the way across. So even some of the bigger cities, because they have a much higher population per capita, they're not doing as many projects. So the towns on this end are Edenton, Marshall, Washington, Weldon, Beaufort, New Bern, Salisbury, Hillsborough, that are doing the most projects per capita. So this is the income producing credit. So structures such as commercial buildings, mills, industrial buildings, apartments, anything that is generating income that you are leasing to someone is eligible for the income producing rehab tax credit. And that is a 20% federal income tax credit. That's the program that was started in 1976. And then on top of that is a state income tax credit of 15% across the state. There's an additional 5% for tiers 1 and 2 in county, and it's economic development. It has to do with economic development. So Hertford County is a tier 1 county, so they're eligible for additional 5%. So if you have a commercial building, you have a combined 40% of the cost of the rehab of the building that you can get back in income tax credit. So it is not a tax deduction, it's a tax credit. So if you spend $100,000, which I'm going to use only because it's an easy, even number, on your building rehab, you can get $40,000 of that back in income tax credit. So you're just not paying state and federal income tax until you've used up that $40,000. So it's quite substantial. The state historic tax credit is that second 20% in Hertford County for commercial buildings, and for residential buildings, it's just the 15% for owner-occupied buildings. And that one was effective, it became effective in 2016, the current program. So 2015 was the year with no credits. And it will expire in 2030. This is going back to the tiers. So you all are probably not gonna have this happen in Winton. The state legislature, when they renewed the tax credit, put caps on it for projects over $10 million. So they're really looking at projects, the big mill complexes in Rocky Mount and Winston-Salem and Durham that were very large. I don't know where you would spend $10 million on one building in Hertford County probably. So this is generally not going to apply to you. But if you spend more than $20 million, know that you're not going to get a credit on it. This is a map showing the different development tiers across the state. So you can see that Hertford County is a tier 1, so it's eligible for that extra credit. And all of the big urban areas that don't need any extra development help don't get that credit. So this is, I'm not honestly sure what this is. Development, so it's the same. It's really any of these. So this is breaking down what those commercial income producing credits are for. There are extra credits for manufacturing related buildings, certified structures, and it has to have been vacant for 2 years. But this is really the mill credit. So I'm not sure, I don't know if he's gonna get to the mill credit. This is just doing the math for you, showing you that with your 20% federal plus your 20% state credit, the amount of money that you can use. So the asterisk is, in order to qualify for the federal credit, you need to reinvest the value of the building. So if you have, that's sort of the easiest way to explain adjusted basis. So if you have a commercial building that the tax value is $100,000, but the property value is $60,000, then the value of the building is that $40,000, and that's the minimum investment that you need to make into the building to qualify for the credits. Does that make sense to everybody? So you have to reinvest the value of the physical building minus the value of the land to be eligible for the credit. So they want to make sure that you're not just doing maintenance or minor work, but that you're making a substantial investment. The qualified rehab expenses, these are the expenses that you can claim the credit on. So they generally include everything that is attached to the physical building itself. So all of your walls, floors, ceilings, structural work, systems, roofs. Things that they do not include are site work, landscaping, or additions to the existing building. And then things like acquisition and insurance, things like that. You can include your contractor fees, your architect's fees, all of those things are eligible expenses. So again, they're going to want to see a plan that shows the site work and any additions and review those to see that they're compatible with the historic structure, but you cannot get credit on those things that are not part of the historic structure. And the historic structure is really the structure that is existing right now. So if they had an addition in the 80s, that is there and that is part of the structure and eligible for the credit. Yes.
Question for you. If the Winton Historical Association is a nonprofit, how does a nonprofit or a government entity like a town or a county benefit from tax credits? Because we pay no taxes.
Exactly. So you have to get creative. We were just talking with Reed about this morning. There are examples where nonprofits have paired with a developer in some way so that the developer takes the credit. You have to generally end up with some sort of public-private partnership with an entity that can take the credit. And it may mean, he had an example this morning that like a developer or the for-profit, that you transfer ownership to them and lease the land back from them for a certain period of time as part of your agreement so that they own the property and can take the credit. So the short answer is that nonprofits and local government cannot take tax credits because they don't pay income tax. The longer answer is that you just need to be creative in how you structure a partnership.
I think, I live in Virginia, so I don't know whether there's a difference in the rules, but it seems like the nonprofit I was part of sold some tax credits. Does that sound like, did we do something illegal?
No. There are ways to sell the tax credits. It involves a lot of banks and financial things and questions that I was never trained to answer. So it is possible, and they talk with a lot of these mill credits because a developer can't necessarily use $20 million in income tax credits. Well, they won't have 20 million, but you know what I mean. So they have ways of selling them to get other investment. I don't know how that works. So you want to talk to an accountant or an investment person that understands how those partnerships are structured. It ends up being a partnership with someone who then takes the credit for you and gives you something in return. Does that answer your question?
Yes, so we can benefit from the tax credits when we renew the post office museum, or the town of Winton could take tax credits when they could benefit from tax credits when they redo their community center.
So they cannot take the tax credit, but they could benefit from it depending on how they structure a partnership with someone who can take the credit.
Okay.
Yeah. But those are financial questions that I won't pretend to give you advice on. But yes, accountants that have worked with the tax credits before may know. And Reed said too that they have a good contact at the IRS that he can put you in touch with to answer some of these questions too. Because the State Preservation Office, being architects and contractors, also do not want to answer your tax questions. So they can put you in touch with someone that can answer them.
I just want to make one comment. You can actually leverage your tax credits, but you do have to go through the CPA and legal counsel to set those types of things up. But also I wanted to mention, in September, Reed and his group is also coming to a Hosky. They're going to actually do a showcase. I also suggest some of you come to that when it's publicized, because it's going to give you a lot of information as well. And you'll also meet some of the people that he's bringing in, that we can in turn hopefully do one of these events here in Winton in very soon.
Yes, and he did say when we found out he couldn't come today, but he's happy to come back and do another meeting, but it may make sense to just piggyback on the Ahoskie meeting as well. So taking the tax credit, you can, the way the tax credits are set up is that you can start, the building is placed in service when the rehab is completed. And you can start taking it for 1 year prior to that. So basically, if you finish your building in 2022, you can back up and take it on your 2021 taxes and for 9 years forward. Whatever credit you cannot use in those 10 years just disappears. So you also want to make sure that you have enough income to take the credit. I had a client, I think in Chapel Hill once, who they got all of their income from Virginia. I don't remember what they did, but they worked in Virginia. And they didn't have enough state income to use a state tax credit, so it didn't make any sense. Income, wait, back up, let me make sure we got all of that. So that's the state tax credit. You can take it back, forward, and forward, back 1 year and forward 9. The federal credit, they divide automatically over 5 years, and then it can roll over for up to 20 years. And then once that time period is up, the credit, whatever the balance is, just evaporates. And it needs to be a certified rehabilitation, which he may go into, I assume he will. So the maximum state credit, again, this is where that $2 million cap is $4,500,000 based on a $20 million project. So you all are probably not going to get anywhere near that. And then we just talked about this stuff again. So eligibility. So the way that you access the tax credits, you need to be either individually listed on the National Register or a contributing resource within the historic district. So that's where the map and the actual document are going to be helpful, because the document lists address by address which buildings are contributing. The rehab must be substantial. So for income producing properties, it's the adjusted basis of the building, or $5,000 if the value of your building is less than $5,000. And then the rehab must meet the Secretary of the Interior standards. So I don't know if he's going to go into those, but those are 10 standards that essentially say retain and repair rather than replace. The way that you access the credit is you fill out an application that shows 4 photos of all of your property inside and out, and a description of the work that you plan to do. And the State Historic Preservation Office reviews that to make sure that it's in line with the Secretary standards. And then for the federal credit, it gets forwarded to the National Park Service, who also review it. And then they will send you back a letter generally saying that you qualify for the credit, and there may be conditions. So I've only ever had 1 or 2 projects come back where they didn't approve it with conditions flat out. So they'll approve it and say with the condition that you don't paint the brick, or that you leave this opening and don't fill it in, or they'll spell out exactly what you need to do. And it's a voluntary program, so if you don't want the tax credit, you can walk away at any time and you can do whatever you like with the building. The reason that there's review is because of what Julie said earlier, and that the National Register, if it's using federal funding or state funding or permits, then it gets this review. And if you're using tax credits, that's state and federal funding. So if you don't want the state and federal money, then you don't have to have your project reviewed. These are all the properties on the National Register in Hertford County. And here's a summary of a portion of what your Winton Historic District looks like. So if you get the PDF of the full document, it goes in alphabetical order through the streets and lists every address and will list if it's contributing or not contributing to the district. And you've seen that before. What else does he have? Anything? Oh, what is rehabilitation? That's a big question. The process of making possible a compatible use for property through repair, alterations, and additions while preserving those portions or features which convey its historical, cultural, or architectural value. So the Secretary of the Interior Standards, and that's what all of the tax credit applications are based on. The essence of those standards is to repair rather than replace. And if you need to replace in kind with the same material and the same profile. Again, repair rather than replace. And that in some instances can be more practical. The way that buildings were constructed 100 years ago, they were constructed in a way that you could replace a few pieces of siding or replace a portion of the roof or replace a single window without having to replace everything. So here are the basic principles. Retain and repair historic materials, features, and spaces. Retain historic character, even if the use changes. And design compatible, reversible alterations and additions. So, I'll have to, I forgot what I was gonna say.
Sorry.
It's okay. So I think the point is repairing the windows when possible. And again, if you're having trouble finding contractors or people that can do the work, the State Preservation Office can also guide you in those directions. So retain the historic character even if the use changes. So you may have, this looks like a fire station that was converted to something else, but trying to keep the new doors and the new storefronts within the existing openings when possible, and retaining the character defining features. This appears to be a church that was converted to some sort of event venue. And then to design compatible and reversible additions and alterations. So what this means generally is that if you are making a change, that it's something that could be undone in the future. And this happens most often with additions. So they may have you set an addition in from the building or create a little hyphen or a little connector between an addition and the building so that it's clear where the historic building ends and the new building begins. So this is going through the application process. So the application is generally divided into categories. So you go category by category and talk about the existing roof, what its condition and materials are, what are your plans for the existing roof, all the way through. And depending on your project, if you're doing just a residential rehabilitation, you may not be doing anything to the roof. So you just need to say that in the application that there's no changes proposed for that area. And it goes all the way through interior and exterior features. And depending on your project too, you may not, if you're doing a commercial project, you probably need architectural drawings just for the permitting process. But if you're doing a kitchen renovation within your own home and you're not moving doors and windows, you may not need architectural drawings, and you can submit a hand drawing, just floor plan of your house to the state, and that's all that they'll need. So you don't need to go out and pay for extra drawings or documentation that you wouldn't normally be doing. So the role of the State Preservation Office is to administer the program at the state level, and the National Park Service administers it at the federal level. The IRS and the Department of Revenue administer the financial side of it. So you should definitely consult a tax professional as you do this. The way that the tax credit amount is determined is that you tell the Department of Revenue and the IRS how much you spent. So on the final end, you submit after photos of the entire property inside and out that show that you did all the things you said you were gonna do and you didn't do anything that you didn't tell them about. And then you give them a number of what your rehab cost. And they don't wanna see your spreadsheets and your receipts and all of your things. They just want the number. But if you ever get audited, the Department of Revenue is definitely gonna wanna see all your spreadsheets. So hold on to all of your things. But the people reviewing this are architects, so they don't need to see how much your ductwork cost. They just wanna know what the total amount was. And here are some regional projects that he included for you. The Rocky Mountain Mills, which I don't think is finished. Aren't they still working on it? It's a big project. So even your garage, because the nomination lists garages and sheds and outbuildings and things, if any of those secondary structures are contributing, you can also use the tax credits for those. I think it's the inside of the garage. Oh, so they fixed the doors, go back. So they fixed the doors in place, so it looks like a garage from the outside, and on the inside, the doors don't move anymore.
Cool.
Mm-hmm. I think even I would look at that barn and say it's not savable, but.
That's a great project.
I'm sure we would have had a lot more to say about these, but unfortunately, I don't know the specifics of these projects.
Oh, that one's in Halifax.
Mm-hmm.
Hopefully there's an after.
It's beside the hen and the hog.
Mm-hmm. This is a recently completed one too. So this is an example of a building on Ocracoke Island that needed to be elevated because of flood protection. And so they could utilize the historic tax credits to elevate the house. So his keys to success are consider buildings that are not obviously historic. So in some ways you have to sort of think outside of the box on these projects. Fit the project to the building. So I see a lot of, especially homeowners, and especially in places like Raleigh and Durham where property values are so high that they're trying to shoehorn the building that they want inside the shell of another building, and it doesn't always work. Plan to retain the important features. The historic things are probably the thing that attracted you to the building in the first place. Allow plenty of time for review. This, in theory, the State Preservation Office reviews within 30 days and the Park Service reviews within another 30 days. In reality, it's sometimes 45 to 60 days at each level. So you can always amend your application. So I always tell people to submit sort of your best guess and at least get them looking at it and reviewing it. And you can always do an amendment if you change your mind on something later. Pay attention to the Part 2 conditions that come back because those are the conditions for approval. And then choose an experienced team. So I think the most important thing is probably making sure you have a contractor that's familiar working with historic buildings. If you don't, you're going to have a contractor that wants to apply new building techniques and new building materials, and again, try to sort of shoehorn them into a historic building instead of having someone that really knows how to work with the specific building materials and problems that you have. As always, homeowners are encouraged to consult with the State Historic Preservation Office. You have a regional office in Greenville, and both Reed, who is assigned to your region, and John are always happy to come out on site visits and take a look at things and talk to people. And as long as the State Preservation Office is staffed, they're happy to send people out to talk to you. They cannot, however, give you any tax advice. So they're going to talk to you about the buildings and what's eligible for the credits, and figuring out how to structure the finances of it is up to you and your accountant. And non-income producing. So this is just the state credit, and all of the individual residences are eligible for a 15% state credit. And that includes, again, the secondary structures that are associated with that. No, you're fine. The state credit has a much lower threshold, so it's $10,000 is your minimum investment. So that goes really quick on a house. So if you need a new HVAC system, you could use a state preservation tax credit and get 15% of that back. If you need a new roof or an exterior paint job, a lot of those things are quickly going to get near that $10,000 mark. So the catch is that you can only use this credit once every 5 years. So you may want to clump some of your work together. But and it's 15% of that. So if you have a $10,000 rehab, you have $1,500 in state income tax credit. But yes, if you find that you need a new HVAC system and you were planning to get the roof done in 2 years, you just might want to do it all at once and then take the credit on that. So again, you can take it in the year that the building was placed in service, so the year that it was finished, and forward for 9 years. And you can only take it once every 5 years. So you want to make sure that you sort of capture as much as you can in that. So this last one has to do with transferring the credit. With both programs, the entity that owns the property and controls the property at the time that the building is placed in service is the entity that's eligible to take the credit. So for builders and developers, what that means is if you are doing a house that you want to flip, you can apply for the credit, you can do all the things that you need, excuse me, to meet the criteria for the credit, and then you can transfer ownership of the property to the buyer, and they can file the final application and take the credit. So I worked for a contractor briefly in Durham, and they did this a lot. So they would sell the house with the credits. So then whoever bought the house could take the credits. The key is that when you file that part saying that the building is finished and we're the ones taking the credit, it's whoever owns the property at that time. Once you file that Part B or the Part 3, you cannot transfer the credits after that point. Here's some regional ones. And I should say, with the federal credit, one thing to think about with those commercial properties is that one of the requirements is that you have to maintain ownership for 5 years. So if you are thinking of flipping commercial properties, you need to build that into the timeline that you need to own the property for 5 years. And if you sell it before that 5-year window, you have to pay back incrementally the percentage of the income tax credit that you took that applies to that. So if you sell it back after 4 years, you have to pay back 20% of the tax credit that you took. So they want to make sure, and this is based on that 1976 tax credit, that people are really investing substantially by meeting that minimum investment of the value of the building, and that they're staying in these towns and sort of keeping that investment for at least 5 years, and that they're not flipping things and moving on to the next thing. So these are just residential examples. They may be reused timbers. I think this one may be in Edenton. So he's showing you here that the addition is set apart from the main house by this little connector so that it reads as a separate volume. And then maintaining the wood sheathing and the door surrounds and as much as you can from the interior. The main thing with residential credits is really trying to maintain as much of the existing floor plan. One of the biggest things that I run into with people is people that want to remove a bunch of interior walls and create one big open floor plan. And then it really destroys the interior character of the historic house. So they're pretty flexible with kitchens and bathrooms, but keeping really those core public spaces in the house as they were. So this is another one, I think it's on the Outer Banks, but it was one that ended up being elevated after one of the hurricanes. And these are more examples of being elevated, and you can use the credits to elevate a building if that's something. I don't know that you all have a lot of flooding in Winton. And then one of the things that they did was apply addition, that they raised it quite as high as they did. Do y'all have questions on any of the tax credit issues as we're flipping through these? I know it's a lot to throw at you all at once.
It's just pictures.
So this is a map showing that 91 of the 100 counties have had some number of tax credit projects. You can see some of them tend to be clustered in the counties with the bigger cities because they just have more. Stimulates local economic activity, increases jobs and housing, promotes smart growth, boosts heritage tourism, stabilizes and increases local property tax base, and generates greater sales and property and income tax revenue.
I'll do it.
Thank you.
Do y'all have questions at all about the district or the National Register program or the tax credits? Yes.
Can you just give some examples of interior things that have been done, like in residential
Sure.
contributing properties?
Mm-hmm. So I've worked with homeowners on tax credit applications before, and a lot, I have had homeowners do something as small as rehabbing a single bathroom, where they didn't do anything else in the whole house except rehab that bathroom. I've had homeowners rehab kitchens. I had, especially when I worked for the contractor years ago, they did a lot of whole house remodels where they would basically top to bottom, give it all new systems, refinish all the floors, do all new kitchens and baths, new roofs, new paint. So it really is set up to do any level of work that you want to do. And again, what you end up doing is submitting before photos of the entire house inside and out. So even if you're just doing a bathroom remodel, because they don't come out to do site visits for every single property, they basically need a visual tour of what the property looks like. And then you do your work and you give them a second visual tour with photographs at the end. And if all your work is in the kitchen, all the rest of your photos are gonna basically look the same, but that's what they wanna see because you didn't propose doing work in the other spaces. But yeah, and anything, so the things that tend to trip people up, like I mentioned, are creating open floor plans. They can be flexible about widening door openings, but they don't like removing whole walls. Replacing windows is always gonna be a problem, unless you can prove or show that they are deteriorated beyond repair. What else? Those are the two biggest ones. Painting unpainted brick is a big problem. So, and the reason is that once you paint brick, you can't ever unpaint it. It is a permanent change, and so that's the problem with painting any kind of masonry, brick, or stone. Those are probably the three biggest hurdles for residential. But really, all of your systems, if you think about heating, electrical, HVAC, any of those systems, all of those are really buried within the building for the most part. So they're gonna qualify every single time because they're not changing anything that you see. They're really looking at what you can see on the inside and outside of the building, and everything that's within the walls, they need to know almost nothing about.
So painting and floor refinishing interior can be,
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, painting, plaster repair, floor refinishing, kitchen and bathroom remodels, taking out popcorn ceilings, any of those things, any of your systems. Finishing space that wasn't finished before, so if you have an attic or a basement space that was unfinished, finishing those spaces, all of that qualifies.
I think the North Carolina tax is about 5%, so $10,000 roof is $1,500 with shelter is about $30,000 with income. That's the tax you would pay on.
Yeah. So, for a lot of these things, if you're doing the work anyway, it's free money. It does cost money to apply because they have to pay the staff to review things. So there's a $250 fee for them to review it. If their project is under $50,000, then there's no second fee. It's just $250. And that $250 you can also apply to the amount that you take the credit on. Projects that are more than $50,000 have an additional fee for the second part of the review. And the fees for the federal review are structured in a sliding scale that's sort of a strange, complicated way to describe, but there are fees for the review. But otherwise, if you're doing $15,000 worth of work, it may be worth the $250 to get that money back. Y'all don't have any questions?
So this would just be good from the time that the historic district was designated, right? It's not retroactive or anything.
That is a great question. In theory, it is, okay. So if you had something that was listed on the register a long time ago, you could retroactively get credit on things back to 2016, which is when the new legislation started. I don't know that you can get things retroactive before it was listed, but you could go back to the winter of 2020, to that December when it was listed. That's a great question for the state. The catch,
You might even do that year,
it may be all of 2020. That's a great question. The catch too is that you want to make sure that what you did, that you have before pictures so that you can show what it looked like before and after, and that whatever you did is going to be approved. So if you're doing things like painting and a new roof, those things are always going to be approved. But if you're doing more significant rehab, because it's an all or nothing credit, either your whole project is approved or it's not. If you have done something that they would not approve, then you either don't take the credit or you have to go back now 2 years later and undo or fix something. So if you're doing anything substantial, it's always a good idea to do the application ahead of time. It's really important if you're doing something substantial that changes what the building physically looks like on the inside or the outside. Well, I did a great job explaining slides that were not mine.
We thank you for coming. Please stay, visit, talk to our experts before they run out of the building. We have a lot of food in the back, and we'd like for you to stay a little while and eat and talk with us. Thank you for coming.